Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith. Today I'm excited to be starting the playthrough of the Tainted Grail, the Fall of Avalon, the pre-Kickstarter prototype. And if you haven't seen this solo setup video, which I've already released, make sure you go find that on the channel. You'll definitely get some insight into how the game is set up and how much time it takes to set up and what's involved. It's very, very streamlined and is opened up in packs, which I find extremely useful to learn the game as you go. We'll also be spending the majority of this particular video learning the first day or second day and going at a slower pace so that we can grasp all the concepts. And then we will start to pick things up and I'll start to explain things less. So the first thing I want to announce before we go into that playthrough is a giveaway. And you guys have already seen this on the title of the video, so I've already kind of spoiled it. The giveaway is for the Tainted Grail, the core pledge. So the winner of this giveaway, which I'm launching right now, as of right now, you can go to the description below, you'll find a link and you can get in on the giveaway. The winner will walk away with a core pledge of the Tainted Grail, which I think is awesome, very exciting, and will just kind of pair itself nicely with the playthrough we're going to do here on Rolling Solo. The other thing that's super exciting is the winner's not just going to receive the Tainted Grail, they're also going to receive the core game of Lord of Hellas as well. So that winner is going to be walking away with 2 games, and you will not have to wait for Lord of Hellas to arrive. Lord of Hellas, the core experience, will be sent to the winner immediately, whereas Tainted Grail would obviously be following the Kickstarter production schedule. So that's super exciting, and I thought I would throw that out there at the beginning of this video so that you guys are aware of that. And without further ado, I only have about 2 things I want to talk about from the setup video that I'd like to correct. They weren't major misses, but they're just some things that I want to ensure everyone understands prior to moving into the gameplay. So how about we get started? The first thing I want to make mention of is the fact that in the solo setup video, I mentioned that we were going to remove the secrets deck from the playthrough, and that was actually incorrect. The secrets deck itself is actually comprised of a number of different special items and story and narrative driven items that are going to be hopefully obtained by our character or could cause some other game mechanics to change. So this secret deck is not being removed from this solo play and will be brought back in. Now, the only thing from the solo setup video that I actually missed doing was actually giving myself some of these neutral resource tokens in the food and wealth categories for our starting hero. So our starting hero starts with 3 food, which I'll denote by putting these 3 markers in there, and 1 wealth. And you'll also notice, as I mentioned before, these symbols will appear throughout the gameplay so that we can easily identify which of these different areas those costs will come from. During the solo setup video, we pulled the top event card off the deck, but we didn't actually read it. And I want to do that now so everyone can understand what we're doing here. What's the first event in this particular story? So we are in Act 1, Chapter 1. It says at the very top of the card to place this card on the top of the ongoing events pile. So we're going to find a spot for that. It will be considered an ongoing event. The time is short. A guardian Menhir that protected your town since ancient days will soon go out, letting dangerous powers flood in. You need to explore locations surrounding your area while they're still safe, and learn a secret Druidic ritual that would let you reawaken the Menhirs. It says down here, new task. Earn a Menhir rights card before the Menhir goes out. You can learn these rights in locations surrounding our area. When completed, draw a card from the bottom of the event deck and reveal it immediately. Hint, if this is your first game or you're not sure how to start, try spending a night in your farmhold to read its dream. And the dream is basically a card that can present itself with a whole bunch of story and narrative driven objectives or hints towards achieving some of those objectives. And you'll see what I mean when we actually try to do so. Alright guys, you ready for this? Let's begin this playthrough. I'm super excited. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to go through a kind of a tutorial day within the land of Avalon. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to spend a day taking things a bit slowly, but just getting used to some of the mechanics, revealing a couple cards, taking a look at some of the icons, starting to get a hold on what this game has in store for us. And then as we go along, we're going to start speeding things up, cutting rules, explanations out, and actually getting to the meat of the game. So this first day is going to be a lot of just learning and exploration and trying to figure out what we can and cannot do. So the very first thing that I want to show you guys from the very beginning is we have this card right here. It's a reference card. It's a very, very handy reference card. It's going to show you, a new day begins. It's got during the day, the end of day, and all these things are things we're going to attempt to do in a particular day. Remember that our Menhir right here has 7 days before it goes down and before its light is extinguished. So if the Menhir goes out, then we are in big trouble. We don't want that to happen. We do have actions within the game, which are also shown on another reference card, but we'll go through these when we actually start playing. But essentially, you've got yourself travel, explore, location actions, which are actually on cards and they're free, and then activating a Menhir. Now, normally, most of this stuff costs energy in order to do, but the location-based actions, which are signified right on the cards themselves, are completely free. So that's extremely handy to use those to your advantage when you can. But some of them can cost you quite a bit of energy sometimes as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to start it out by having our adventurer go ahead and head down towards the Forlorn Swords. Now, why do I want to go down there? There's a whole bunch of other things around here I could check out. I could even check out the Farmhold if I wanted to. But basically, we have the Warrior Fair here, we have the Charred Conclave, we have the Hunter's Grove, and we have Forlorn Swords. So, I'm seeing swords, and I'm excited by that. I think going after a weapon would make a lot of sense. Likely, we're going to have encounters that have to do with fighting. We're probably going to want a weapon besides just having our bare hands. So, what we're going to do is we're going to actually expend one of our energy, which currently sits at full, and it's going to reduce itself down to 5. So, we'll go ahead here, and we're going to reduce our character's energy from full down to 5 in order to pay the cost of moving. So our journey begins. Our hero is going to leave the Farmhold and is going to head down to the Forlorn Swords to see if there's something down there of value. So we're going to have him move down like this. We've already spent the energy to do so. So now we are at 4 energy. So that's something to also take note of, is the fact that we only have so much energy to expend. Once we get to either 1 or 0 on the energy track, which is denoted by red areas on that energy track, we're considered exhausted. And there's some stuff that will happen at the end of the day when we rest that we'll essentially be penalized for and not be able to recover fully and not get some benefits. But if we don't exhaust ourselves at the end of the day, then we can fully recover and be ready for the next day. There will be game mechanics that will cause you in some situations to need to spend more energy in order to survive something or maybe obtain something that you really want. But that's the risk reward, is do you want to expend yourself to exhaustion, or do you want to be very cautious with the amount of energy that you're going to spend in a day? And a lot of this stuff, being it's narrative driven, is going to pull you in and make you want to spend energy. So we've already spent 1. We moved into the Forlorn Swords. The first thing we do when we land on the card, besides looking at the gorgeous artwork, is we're going to take a look at all the numerical keys that are sitting around the outside of the cards. And if there are any, we're going to go ahead and reveal them, as long as the Menhir that is currently in play is either diagonal from it or adjacent to it. So as you can see right now, the Menhir, which is sitting up here, is adjacent to all of these, or orthogonally adjacent to all of these 4 that are already out. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually have the ones that are diagonal in the future be able to be revealed as well, because we do have a Menhir that has a light source still. So we're able to go ahead and put 108 right here. So we're going to grab 108, place it right beside my character. You'll see it fills out part of the island that we're currently on. So this is the Grubwood, and we'll have to find out more about that when we actually get there. But again, it presents challenges and other specific actions that we can potentially take later on. Now, the other thing that's really interesting to note is the fact that there's nothing on this right-hand side. You'd think that being in here would allow us to reveal this card, but there's no numerical key value on this side of the card, so you cannot reveal anything. But you will notice up here on this particular card that 109 is supposed to be placed underneath once you enter the Charred Conclave. So, in other words, when something like that happens, narratively speaking or thematically speaking, you're basically going to assume that there's mountains or terrain that's impassable that does not allow you to go from where you currently are to this particular location. So in this case, gigantic weapons left by these huge individuals or mortals from the past that have left their weapons here blocking the way, and we can't just traverse through it. So we have some other things we can do on these particular cards. The first thing is a location action, which is completely free. And it says right down here that the Smith Shop is somewhere we could potentially have an action. It says we could pay 2 wealth to draw 1 random item. So that's actually really good if we actually had some wealth. But currently we only have 1 wealth. We got 3 food and 1 wealth from the start. We aren't that wealthy yet. So we are going to be able to take advantage of that location action. Below the location action, we have some flavor text that says, sensing their end, the 4 dwellers ordered giants to push humans into the sea, but the giants abandoned their weapons here. So it just gives you a little bit of some flavor text as to why the weapons are there, what happened there, and it just draws you in a little bit more. So another thing that we can do while we're on a particular location card is we can actually choose to explore it. And what that's going to do is it's going to cost us 1 energy. So I'm going to go ahead right now and knock my energy down from 5 to 4, which again, we now, so you guys are aware, have 2 more energy to spend without becoming exhausted. If we expend any more energy beyond that, we would be exhausted. So we're still safe. When you go ahead and choose to explore, you simply take the card that you're currently on and you flip that card over to reveal what's going on the other side. It's going to give you some flavor text as well as potentially an objective or something to do. So in this case, this one right here looks like we're getting a nice close-up shot of these gigantic swords that are laying all over the place. It says you rest a while in the shade of titanic swords, their rusty smell tickling your nostrils. 100 yards away, an elder smith toils, chipping at the jagged edge of a giant weapon. The hammer he uses to break apart this ancient steel is very strange, as does the sound it makes. Now there's also another note right here, or icon, which mentions that you should be referring to the journal at this particular point during your explore action. So let's go ahead and do that. So technically this is the very first time you guys have ever seen the inside of the journal for this particular game. Now, I'm not going to be showing this on screen as I do my playthrough because that will actually take away from some of the options that you guys might be able to choose from, and I'm going to be choosing from, because at the end of every single part of this playthrough, I'm going to be asking you guys what we should do next. But I did want to show you the inside of the very first location's journal page so you have a rough idea as to how it's structured, remembering again that all of this is going to change by the time the game comes out in terms of its structure, looks, and everything. Right now it's very much in prototype form, but you'll see there's multiple numeric numbers for this particular location. There's actually up to 15, including a dream and a nightmare. So all those things are included here. And what we're going to do is I'm going to actually take the camera shot away from the journal going forward, and we're going to go ahead and actually explore these things without seeing the journal in front of us. It'll be a lot more thematic, at least, for the experience of watching the videos, but I did want to show you guys what it looks like so that you have a rough idea. So while at this location in the Four Lone Swords, we have a few different options that we can do as part of this explore action, and I'm going to go through those right now. The first thing we can do is we can attempt to climb one of the swords. So essentially what we're seeing above the swords is we think there's some gold way up on a pommel. We're not 100% sure, but we could potentially look and try to get there. Might be risky, and also sounds like we could end up getting hurt. The next thing we could try to do is we could talk to the smith. So the smith that it's referring to in this narrative or thematic piece sitting on the card here, we can actually try to talk to that smith and see if he has anything to say or anything to help us with. We can also choose to rest in the shade of the sword, so we can just take a time to rest, which would likely increase our energy, would be my guess, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Or we could just leave. So there's always that option of leaving in most cases, of course, unless the encounter becomes a very much negative or positive type situation where there is no way to easily leave. But in most cases that are neutral, you're able to just walk away if you don't want to do them. So if you read something on a particular back of a card and you just choose not to, as long as it says leave, expiration ends, you can just leave. Otherwise, you're forced to at least choose one option unless it says otherwise. So what I'd like to do is I think I want to talk to the smith. So it's saying for me to go to verse number 2. And in verse number 2, it says, if I'm playing Boar or he's in my party, then I actually move to verse 4. So that's very interesting. So depending on which character I'm playing, the narrative is changing. So I'm moving to verse 4 now. And there's actually some stuff in 2 that I don't get to read. In 4 it says, you know the smith, your missing master and him used to be friends. You greet him politely and then hang back, watching. Each strike of his hammer against the surface of the sword produces a sharp tinging sound. This old steel was shaped not with a tool, but with a song, the smith explains after a while. It takes the same pitch to break it apart. This hammer I have here remembers the music of the Foredwellers. After a while, the smith gathers rusty ingots from the grass and invites you to his hut, where he shows you the rest of the process. Gain 1 XP. Hey, that's pretty good. And the riddle of the old steel status. Nice. So we'll be able to do those in a few seconds, but I'll continue reading what else we get. It says if you don't have the riddle of the oldest steel status, then you gain it. If you already have it at this point, then of course you don't gain it again. Then there's going to be one more thing that we can attempt to choose to do. It says, then choose one of the following. Attempt to buy a hammer, so we can spend either from 1 up to 6 wealth, and then check the result in verse 8. So in other words, we can try to offer a certain amount of gold or wealth to hope to buy a sword from the smith if it pans out. Don't know if it's wise to try to attempt with 1 wealth. I may not actually make that kind of offer because it sounds like we'll probably end up insulting him. The other one is the attempt to steal the hammer. So that obviously has some negative consequences if you try to do that and you get caught. And that actually has you rolling a die and adding 1 for each point of practicality, and then you check your total result. Now, we haven't talked yet about the attributes in depth, but I'm going to do that before we make this choice. The next thing we could choose to do is we could also just leave at this point. So it really comes down to, do we want to buy the hammer, do we want to steal the hammer, or do we just want to leave the situation alone? So let's make our minds up, but first let's take a look at the attributes of our character. So what we're going to cover right now as we take a break from the gameplay is character advancement, as well as advancements in combat, diplomacy cards, and also what these attributes really are and what they entail. We already know we have the triple track here. We already know we have different types of resources like experience, magic, reputation, wealth, and food. We also know the fact we just gained 1 experience, so we're going to put 1 experience in there. The reason I want to move into character advancement, even though at this particular time in the day phase, the character advancement actually happens near the end of the particular day. Instead, what we're going to do is talk about it right now because we just gained an experience, and it just makes sense to actually talk about what that experience can be used for and how that's connected in with a couple other game mechanics. So the first one is every major character that you're playing has 2 decks. They have the combat deck and they have their diplomacy deck, and both of them are actually listed with the hero's name on top, so you know which one's which. There's 25 cards in each of them, and there can only ever be 25 cards in each of them. But there's also these advanced decks that are either for diplomacy or for combat. So an example is like this. Looks exactly the same on the back, and you wouldn't know the difference unless you saw the front of the card. The differences between the cards are actually in the cost value on the card. So you can see the one on the right here has no numerical value under the title, whereas the one on the left here does have a numerical value, and that would cost you 1 XP to bring that into your deck. Now, the cool thing with these decks is that when we get into combat, I'll explain more about why and what you'd like to do, what makes sense in terms of purchasing cards to add to your deck and that type of thing. But in terms of managing your deck, basically any advanced cards that you happen to buy, you always have access to them, and you can always shuffle out or take out during a rest. You can always take out those advanced cards and go back to your basic ones if your basic ones happen to suit your needs better between days. So there is a little bit of wiggle room there in advancing your character as well as tweaking your character depending on what you're trying to do and accomplish. The only other thing to mention here is that experience costs for these particular advanced cards can span anywhere from 1 to 3. So 1 at the lowest, 3 at the highest. Again, that could change even going into production, but currently based on this prototype, that is the range. Now, let's talk about attributes and abilities. So what's an attribute? Well, your attributes are all around your character's board. So you've got empathy, caution, spirituality, practicality, courage, and aggression. Why are they laid out like this? Why are they laid out in rows and on the far sides of the board? The reason is they play off each other. Aggression plays off of empathy, caution plays off of courage, practicality plays off of spirituality. So you have a balance there going between, which inherently creates a unique character for yourself. So every character has a different starting makeup, let's say. So as you noticed when we did our solo setup, we have highlighted rings, tells you exactly what points that they already have in those particular areas, which gives them benefits when they try to make those tests and that type of thing. So how does it work in terms of upgrading using your experience to actually enhance areas where you're weak, like for instance empathy, where I have literally nothing. Well, what it does essentially is you want to think of both of these as being in the same element in terms of they're connected. So we have 2 over here and 0 over here. So if we want to put 1 over here for empathy, that would be the 3rd point in a pair of opposing attributes, which means it would cost 3 XP. That's essentially how it's done. So again, same thing down here. If we wanted to put 1 extra 1 in courage or 1 extra 1 in caution, because there's already 2 across them, you'd have to spend 3 XP. So that's essentially how it works. Now, once you want to go past 2, because you'll also notice, like, and you would think that, hey, if you only go up to 2, that's pretty thin. You'd probably cover that ground pretty fast. Well, it still costs quite a bit of XP once you get up to the 3rd and 4th point, but 4th point is the highest you can ever go. If you continue going any further past 2 on one of these particular attributes, you move into what's considered an ability card. So if I tried to put my 3rd point over here in aggression, then I would pay 3 XP, and it actually would allow me to go ahead and grab from the ability deck a card which I could then use, which looks like this. The backs look like this when we set this up in the solo setup, and it has 2 different sides. So essentially these 2 sides can be rotated depending on what actual ability that I want my character to have. So if I want to focus in a particular area, you know, say for instance I wanted to be like patient under pressure, like that one sounds pretty good, or expert forger. So whichever one you want, you go ahead and slide that in. That's why these cards fit perfectly, just like so, and you'd slide it underneath. So that's essentially how you go ahead and use abilities, and we'll obviously see that as we go through the playthrough, but I thought I'd kind of help you understand how the experience connects in with the attributes, and also how experience can be spent to actually upgrade your decks. And one last thing to clear up, just in case there's any confusion, but 4 XP is the highest that you'll ever pay, even when you move into putting your 5th or higher points into one of these attributes. So for instance, if I had 2 inside of empathy and I already had 2 inside of aggression, I would technically be moving for my 5th point by going for another upgrade. And if I did that, it would still only cost me 4 XP. Okay, so here's the funny part about this. We have 2 options. One is to give him some of our wealth, which we don't have much of, and would likely offend him. It's only 1 wealth, and he's crafting these amazing swords and stuff like this, and I don't think he's going to appreciate us offering him 1 wealth, so I'm not going to go down that road. I'm actually going to go the worst route, because I'm crazy, and I want to risk it and see if we get something decent from it. But I want to attempt to steal it from him. Yes, I know, and we even know the smith, and, you know, my missing master and him used to be friends, but apparently I am some kind of corrupt individual who just wants to steal stuff, and that's what I'm going to try to do. So essentially what I need to get on this roll of a d6 is a 5 or 6, and then I'm successful. However, for every point of practicality my character has, which my character currently has +1 in its attribute there for practicality, so any 4s that I roll will actually end up being 5s, meaning, or I should say any 4 will end up being a 5 because of that boost, meaning it's a 50-50 roll on a d6, which I don't think is bad odds. I mean, it's not great, but it's even. So let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. I'm sure if this fails, I'll likely have to deal with some type of repercussions, but the reward might be worth it. So here we go. Ha! A 6. Nice. Okay, so we rolled a 6. Now we also get the +1, so technically we hit a 7, which is actually really high and way more than we needed. It does say if your total result is at least 5, you gain the Old Steel Smasher. Now that sounds pretty cool. So this is where things are interesting. So the old school, the Old Steel Smasher, I should say, comes from the Secrets deck, not the item deck. So the Secrets deck is another reason why it's back in this journey, because this carries a lot of narrative and, thematically connected cards that you're going to gain throughout the narrative of the story. So I'm going to go through this deck here until I find this Old Steel Smasher. Here it is. All right, now let's talk about this card first off. So right off the bat here, you'll see that this particular card has an S right there. What does that mean? That means that this card is considered special. So awesome. We ended up stealing away a gigantic smashing hammer, which is amazing. I don't know how we pulled that off. We obviously got some pretty good hands. The crazy thing about it too that's funny is technically we have the hammer on our guy, so we were meant to have this thing even though we stole it. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead here with at least that's my logic. So we're gonna go ahead here and look at the keyword on the card. The keyword is weapon. So when the keyword is weapon, what that means is during combat, if you have multiple weapons on you and they all have the keyword weapon, That's what matters. And you can only use one card with the keyword weapon. You can hold a bunch of them, but they all have to be flipped down, the ones that you're not going to use during a combat. We'll talk more about combat and sequence and all that kind of stuff later on, but I just want to mention that now. The other benefit this card gives me is it says it's going to add 1 to the value of your sequence, which is really good. It's just going to help us when we're in combat. Again, we'll talk about it later. This one says during purple encounters, you get to add 2 instead. So it's even better against purple encounters, which is awesome. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to tuck that away as if we never stole it and hope that the smith didn't even notice. And actually that is going to end our explore action here. And when an explore action concludes, what you simply do is take the card that you were dealing with, you flip it back over like this, and your character's back on top, and now you're free to choose something else to do. Now there's a whole bunch of things we could do, but technically we only have 2 more energy left on our character, and we technically have 4, but that's only if we push ourselves far, far into exhaustion, which I prefer not to do before the day ends. So we have 2 more energy to spend before the day comes to a conclusion. So we could potentially move back to the farm hold, and then maybe do what I see here as the chores for the townsfolk, which actually looks kind of cool. It basically says pay 1 energy to gain 1, and this particular symbol means reputation. And reputation is really good because obviously if you have a good reputation, then your aid is going to be you have a much greater chance of receiving aid from villages and settlements and other type of effects and narrative-driven stories throughout the game. So reputation is a good thing. So we could do this, and it also says once per day. So we can only do this once per day. We cannot just sit there forever paying to boost up our reputation. But I think I'm going to do that. So I'm actually going to spend 1 of my energy to go back here. And we're going to stop right here. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay 1 energy. Now you'll notice by moving 1, it cost me an energy. And then paying 1 right now cost me an energy. So technically on my player board, as of right now, our energy has now hit 2, which is just above the exhaustion limit. So we'll pay that 2 energy now. So 1 for moving and then 1 to actually gain a reputation. I'll take 1 of these markers and add it to the reputation area. So now we've got some wealth, some reputation, decent amount of food, and an experience point as well. All right, so after a long day of heading down to the Forlorn Swords, stealing some nice equipment from a friendly smith, and just being an all-around bad person, we're now going to go back to our farmhold, take our head, place it on the pillow, and pretend like we are okay. And what we're going to do here is we've technically run out of energy, but we actually still technically have 2 more energy we could spend if we wanted to go into exhaustion, which I'm not going to do. So your day essentially ends when either you choose to pass or your energy completely depletes. In other words, into the exhaustion, into the red. We can choose to end our day anytime. As soon as you want to stop spending energy and stuff like that, you can pass at any time. So this is a perfect time to do it because we won't be in an exhausted state going into the rest phase. So at the end of the day, the very first thing you do is you're going to consume a food. So let's go to our character board here and start doing that. So we're going to consume 1 food. We'll take 1 of those markers away. And we cannot raise our health any higher because we're already at max health, and we can't lower our terror any lower because we're already at the lowest terror. Now it says if you're not exhausted, in other words, if your energy is on either 0 or 1, that's what exhausted which is these 2 red positions right here, and we're not exhausted at all, then we can go ahead and we can actually restore all of our energy. So we get to go from 2, which is a gray space, all the way back up to full, no problem. This is where that penalty comes in if you chose to go into the exhausted state. If you happen to exhaust yourself down to 0 or even 1, then on your next rest, the highest you can go to is 4. And this is where it starts to hurt you going into the next day, but sometimes it's completely necessary based on the actions and things you want to accomplish in a given day. But we're back up to full health, or I should say full energy, which is great after our long night of rest. Now, the other thing that happens here is the dream. So there's a dream which is located on the actual card itself that's denoted by an eye on the location card, which we talked about in the setup, as well as earlier on in this video. And basically what that means is we're going to have a dream right now. So we're going to go to that location's number in the journal and read the dream section. In your restless dream, a pale lady rises from the water. Her eyes are milky and her skin is spoiled with rot. She whispers something into your ear. Her breath smells of sea salt, kelp, and rotten fish. You barely remember the words. There was something about 3 enigmas, one hidden under the Isle of the Dead, one clutched in the grasp of burned hands and arms, and one buried in a mist-covered mound. But what could it mean? And then there's a hint here underneath the dream that says, the dream refers to 3 out of 9 locations surrounding this farmhold. It's possible some of them are not yet revealed. And that is very much true. As you can see from our adventure, we haven't gone up here. We haven't actually gone over here. And there also is a space down here on the right. And once we've checked all 3 of those locations, we'll have revealed all 9 cards around the Menhirs. So it's very much that the things that are being referred to within this dream are telling us to go to specific locations for an objective. And this is where dreams become extremely important. Dreams reveal more of the story and setting of the game, but many of them contain helpful hints. And the dream you get in this farmhold is really, really helpful. This dream we've just obtained really gives us some great information as to where we should go. Though we might not understand and decipher it right away, it's obviously referring to some locations that are not yet revealed, but some of them might already be revealed, and it's up to us to figure out where they are and interact with them in the right way and be successful at it. So there's an element of the game unfolding, which is really cool through the narrative of dreams, as well as the interactions through the characters that are living within the world. And that's going to conclude the very first day in Avalon. And hopefully this very first day was enough of a basic understanding of some of the movements and actions that we can do throughout the game in order to interact with different things. The action card states that we can travel, which we did, explore, which we did, do location actions on cards, which we did. And the only thing we haven't done that is another action that's possible is called activating a Menhir. So later on in the game, you are able to go ahead and try to activate another one of these ancient statues to then allow you to explore even further. So that's a very important point too, but we won't see that until we progress any further. The great news is we are finished the first day and we can move into a brand new day. So moving into our next day, the very first thing we do when a new day begins is we turn all the dials in play. So if there's any dials in play that are used for either the ancient statues or for counters or any other game mechanics, we're going to turn those dials down 1. So we do actually have one underneath this ancient statue. So let's go ahead and drop this down by 1. So as you can see, this current statue has 7 as its first number. We're going to have to get this thing rotated to 6. To denote we have already spent a single day, and this statue is 1 day closer to going completely dark. The next thing we do is we go to the event deck and reveal a new card, and we got good weather. So the very first travel today is going to be free. So it's not going to actually cost us any energy in order to move. It also says right there in the flavor text, experienced journeymen know to make the most of decent weather while it lasts. So obviously, different weather conditions are going to come into the game that are going to affect how much energy we likely have to spend to move around. So we need to take the most advantage right now of moving around the map and obtaining different things that are going to benefit us and help progress the story. So moving into our second day, we just have to take note of the fact that we had now removed the major training wheels that we had in the first day of learning different actions to do and the basics of the gameplay. Now we can really start getting our feet wet on where we're going. We got a dream that gave us objectives. We know we're going after some enigmas. We got to find them. There's 3 of them. And so those are some of the things we can keep an eye out for. And we'll also refer back to that dream if we need to. One of the places that I'm seeing here right now already revealed is called the Charred Conclave. And there's this figure here standing that looks to be charred and burnt up. So it's quite possible that that's one of the locations we need to go to, but who knows? I actually don't know for sure. We also have 3 unrevealed locations around the map that we still need to check out, but I think going here makes sense because we'd actually reveal 2 locations at once, so that's not a bad idea. But the first thing I want to do before we go out venturing into the wild, and again, remember, we get 1 free move action this turn, or day, I should say, that's free because of our good weather card. The first thing I want to do is I actually want to spend an energy to take a look and actually explore the town we call home, which is the farmhold. I want to flip the card over and see if we can potentially interact with the locals, find a little bit more about the story or something that can provide us with some useful information before we leave. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do an explore action on this area right here. So I'm going to go ahead and move the Menhir out of the way. I'll just move my figure out of the way and one of the cards, and we're going to flip this thing over and see what we get. Should be quite interesting to see what's going on in our own home. A deep feeling of loss fills everything. From dilapidated farms to the sunken eyes of those who remain, the Menhir in the market is all but extinguished, and everyone brave or resourceful enough left to find a solution. So we have a couple things here that we can do as part of location actions, or also dependent on whether or not we have particular cards and things like that with us, or statuses. So we do have the red sign card, and we have the Hunter's Mark status. Both of those would take us to particular verses in the game. Now, also earlier on, when I went through my first interaction, I didn't actually show you guys where to mark off statuses that we gained, and we did gain a status. So what we're going to do before we move into the journal, because I know we're heading there based on the fact we have a journal here, and I know I don't have the red sign, the Hunter's Mark, or the fact that the actual ancient statue is not at this location. It is still here. We're going to be definitely moving to the journal, but I first want to show you on the save sheet where you mark your statuses. So you can see on the Act 1 save sheet that there is a number of statuses that you can potentially obtain through your journey. And you'll notice one of them's already crossed. It's the Riddle of the Old Steel, which we gained when we were dealing with the Smith down in the Forlorn Swords. So I already went ahead and marked that off. I wanted to show you guys on the sheet what that looks like so that you're familiar with where those statuses are saved, and you just reference those throughout your journey. This is also a great time to go over the fact that you can activate a Menhir if you need to. And in this case, we don't need to because ours is active still. But this was the final action on the action card I showed you earlier that we did not do, which is activate a Menhir. And if we go ahead and do that last action, you can go ahead and try to attempt to do so by following the instructions. And you'll notice that there's an icon on the actual location to let you know whether or not it's a possible thing to do. So we're not going to focus on that right now because that's not really what we're intending to do at all. So we're going to head into the journal and find out what's going on here in the town. So we have 3 different things that we can potentially do here in this town. The first one is we can visit the families of the champions from the first expedition by going to verse 1. We can also ask the townsfolk to help you prepare. That sounds useful. Or we could just leave. I don't want to leave. I want to do something. So let's go ahead and ask the townsfolk to help us prepare because I think that kind of makes sense. We might need something. So it says here, though they have little left, they share with you their last remaining supplies. Well, that's super nice of them. Somehow this seems unworthy of a hero. Well, we are a ragtag group, or at least I'm one ragtag hero. But since all the true heroes were lost, who will dare to question your methods? Now, if you guys don't know the story, there were other heroes that went out to try to succeed and did not come back. So this town is already familiar with releasing heroes to go deal with a problem and having that problem still remain. So that's kind of where that narrative connects. It says here, if you have at least 1 reputation, which we do, thank goodness I gained that reputation on the last day, and no scrounger status, which I don't, I get to receive 1 random item and 1 food, which is awesome because we get some food back. And the scrounger status we actually gain. And then our exploration ends. So let's go ahead and gain all of those good things. More food for us. We also gain the scrounger status. That's nice. So we'll go ahead and mark that off on the save sheet. Lastly, we're going to get to gain an item. So let's find out what we get. A battle horn. That's pretty cool. So the C, just so you guys are aware what the C means, it's craftable. That's what that stands for. The card text here says, draw 1 extra card at the start of your turn if your sequence ends with the courage opening. So that's actually really cool. That particular symbol that's showing there is for courage, and you know that just by taking a quick look at your board itself, you'll see that the icons match there for courage. So that's how I know. But basically, the battle horn seems like a pretty decent card to grab. So we're going to get a battle horn, and we also have that hammer. So that's some pretty useful stuff so far. I think it might be time to kind of head out of town and see what we can find. So we've concluded our explore action, so we'll go ahead here and reset everything, flipping back over the farmhold. And I don't really want to spend too much time here anymore, but I was quite happy to do that particular explore action. And again, just so that you guys are aware, I have reduced my energy down by 1, so we currently sit at 5. So we still currently have 3 more energy to spend, but we also get a free movement without having to spend any energy because we have good weather. And because of that, I'm really tempted to go over to the charred conclave. Let's move on over to the charred conclave. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to reveal all the numerical cards that are around the outside edge, as long as we're within the appropriate distance from the Menhir, which is still currently lit. So we are able to go ahead and reveal 107 and 109. And of course we got a cliff face here, so nothing's being revealed, but nothing would be revealed anyway because it would technically be 2 spaces away from a Menhir, even if there was a number there. So we're going to go to the very top here and put 107 down first. 107 is whitening. So this is going to go way up here, and it says that we can trade with the townsfolk. We can go ahead and pay. We can actually pay or give food to actually acquire wealth there. So that's interesting. So we can actually gain some money by maybe pretend. So basically, it's really good pair up with Hunter's Grove, which is right here, because we can gain food, and then we can turn that food into wealth. So that's interesting. And we'll talk more about that if we actually head up that direction. The one below here, which is 109, is, ooh, this actually looks pretty cool. This is a island asylum, and it actually completes that whole bottom section of the island now. So you'll see we have an asylum of an island. It's healing rights is what we can do on this particular card, and it says pay 1 energy and pay 1 wealth in order to gain 2 health. Here's a better, more close-up shot of the card we just revealed to the southeast, which is the Island Asylum. So you guys can see that and the location action we can take there, as well as just a look of it. And then here's a close-up look at the location revealed in the northeastern section of the map, which is right next to the Hunter's Grove, and looks like they pair up really well together in terms of gathering food on one side and then actually taking that food and converting it to wealth. Might be something worthwhile exploring in the future, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's some type of enigma type thing going on up there in that northeastern section as well as maybe in the asylum. It'll be interesting to see whether these 2 places have anything of benefit for us. So now that we know what's going on with the map and all the different locations we've just revealed, let's focus on the card we just moved to, which is the Charred Conclave. So when we move here, it says, the wind that caresses the long grass of this desolate highland also carries a smell of burnt flesh. Interesting. So this might actually be the area that I need to see in order to progress the story. Now, the other thing on this card that we need to activate right away is this bolt symbol here. So this bolt is basically letting us know the second we move on this card, we need to draw a gray encounter when we enter the location, and this happens only once per day, so it's going to happen right now. Well, this isn't good. We just found ourselves a band of highwaymen. I don't think these guys want to be our friends. So this particular situation, it's a unskilled group of individuals that are trying to basically claim our property, or really just beat us up and steal it. They have the Guardian keyword, and it says here when you drop to 1 health, they're going to just essentially kick you over, steal your wealth and your items, and then the encounter just ends as they run away from you. So that's not really the best. What's underneath of that is a table. It's called the combat table. Essentially, what a combat table is it's used to determine which attack the enemy is going to perform during his turn. So we'll talk about how that kind of works in a bit here. At the very bottom is considered the reward section. So it's basically what you get for defeating an enemy. So this enemy would give us 2 XP and 2 wealth, which is actually not bad at all. So you might be wondering what the number in the top right hand corner is. That number is considered the enemy value. So it's the difficulty of the encounter, and to win, the total value of your combat sequence needs to reach this number. So we need to reach 8 in order to win this, and then we gain the rewards at the bottom of the card, which is 2 experience and 2 wealth. Those little symbols along the side here come down to our attributes, which we talked about on our player board, and they pair up with them based on the symbols, and they're essentially enemy vulnerabilities. So they're basically what the first card in your sequence needs to connect with at least one of them in order to continue the sequence on as you try to chain together cards to increase the amount of damage that you're putting on them. And it's a very interesting mechanic, whereas the actual combat table and what you put out for a sequence works together. So if you put a sequence out that does 2 hits against this enemy, then it's going to look at its combat table and it's going to do something that's in the 2 to 3 range. So the enemy is going to react to your attacks and how much damage you do during your sequences each battle turn, as much as you are going to try to sequence things together to kill it. It's going to be aggressively changing its tactics depending on how much damage you're trying to do. So it's not always about slamming it with 6+ damage, for instance, or 5+ damage all at one hit, because you can see here, if you hit them for 6 damage, they just literally run away. So you can't just beat them into the ground, you'll scare them away, and then you won't gain any rewards. So there's kind of that, it's a very interesting mechanic in that you have to stick around thematically and fight them, and even in some cases make them think that you're actually going to lose, essentially, based on this combat table, and then come out with the win at the end. So, because obviously if we come in and we hit 6 on our first sequence row, they're going to just hightail it out of there. They're going to say, you're way too powerful, these guys are not skilled, and they just don't want to have anything to do with you. So that's really interesting, and all the different encounters are going to be different like that. So let's go into maybe the first round, or the preparation phase of combat. During the preparation phase of combat, you're going to be focused on getting your encounter card that you're dealing with to the far left-hand side of the table, because you'll be building your sequence out to the right of the card. You can see that denoted by all the attributes and vulnerabilities that this particular encounter card has. That'll build out a sequence to the right. So you're going to want some space. The other thing you're going to want to do is choose all your item cards. So you're going to pick which weapon, which shield, which armor, and which follower you'd like to use in the encounter. So you can have multiple of each, but you can only choose to bring certain ones in, or certain number of each of those in, and it's only one of them. So if you have 2 or 3 weapons, you have to pick one, and it's cool because you can pick what makes the most sense for a particular enemy and that type of thing. So for me, I'm going to bring in the Old Steel Smasher because I gained that earlier on. It's my weapon, it's the only weapon I have, but I want to bring it in. Even though this isn't a purple enemy, I'll still gain the +1 to my value of my sequence because of using it. And then I also have the Battle Horn, which says I can draw an extra card at the start of your turn if your sequence ends with courage. So that's pretty cool. So we'll see how that pans out in subsequent combat rounds. The very first phase of your turn is called the draw phase. You're going to draw 3 cards from your combat deck. So I'm going to do that right now. Bloodthirsty Rage, Gather Thoughts, and Surprise Attack. So those are my 3 cards. Now, you always have to draw at least 1 card. But if you don't like your starting hand, you can use a mulligan and draw a new hand, but you have to take 1 less card during that mulligan, which can be not so great. You cannot use a mulligan if your hand size is already 1, of course. The other things to be aware of during this draw phase is you can draw any extra cards granted by card effects, items, or abilities at this particular time. You also draw an extra card if you passed your last turn. Now, we haven't passed our last turn yet because we haven't even had a combat turn yet. So we don't get a bonus for that. Based on our cards here, the Battle Horn itself will let me actually draw an extra card at the start of your turn if your sequence ends with a courage. So I have to make that happen in order to get that benefit, which I can't do currently, but I might be able to do. Actually, no, I can't. None of these actually end in courage. So there's no way I could actually make that happen regardless this particular time around. I could mulligan this, but I actually kind of like some of the cards that I got, so I'm not going to do that. And the weapon says add 1 to the value of your sequence, meaning that they actually get a lot stronger. So let's go ahead and move into building your sequence. Now let's move into part 2 of your turn, which is building your sequence, and there's a number of things to think about here. The first thing is players are going to place any number of combat cards in sequences, and the first combat card you play has to match at least one of its threat keys visible on the left-hand side of the combat card. So one of these symbols on the left-hand side of the card have to tie into one of the encounter card vulnerabilities. Now you'll notice we have all the vulnerabilities available to us with this group of band of highwaymen because they're just not very skilled, but we will encounter monsters and other things that may only have one key open, one vulnerability key open, and making it very difficult to get that first attack in on them. But these guys are wide open for attack. The next thing to remember is each combat card you play after the first one has to match at least one of its threat keys with the key on the card before it. So that's just kind of simplistic understanding that if you go ahead and match these together, the next one on the opposite side has to match against one of the other cards. If it doesn't, you can't place it. Another very important note is about the fact of connecting not only the keys on your combat cards, but the fact that your character attributes actually matter in relation to the keys you're attaching. In other words, when you play a card, it has to both connect with at least one key to the previous card, and the key has to be covered by your current attributes, including ones that are like double keyed, like this one here for Bloodthirsty Rage shows 2 aggression. I would need to have 2 aggression to actually make use and activate this card. So that's very important to note. If you play a card into a gap in the sequence, which is usually caused by an enemy counter, so you can eventually create a particular sequence and an enemy, which you can even see here on this combat section here, may go ahead and counter one of these things. And if they do, then you're going to have to go ahead and you're going to have to remove one of the cards from that sequence. And if you have to actually play a card into the gap, the card has to connect to the card on the left and with at least one key. And if the card doesn't connect to the card on its right, you discard the card on the right and any other cards located after it. The card you have just played should now end your sequence. So after you've successfully placed a card, its card effect becomes active, so you'd read it and apply it when necessary. So for instance, if I connected these ones in a certain way, this one here, for instance, says exhaust and energy, receive 2 if 2 wounds if this is countered. This one says it's uncounterable, it cannot be countered, and it says drop if the enemy deals 2 or more damage in the next attack. So drop would mean that could break a potential sequence. This one here actually has an ability that has to be talked about at the very beginning, and it says can only be played as the first card during your turn. So this has to be the first card played going into your turn, which makes, maybe some of your choices a little bit more restrictive. If you can't or won't place any combat cards in this phase, you may pass it and go to the next phase, and this will allow you to draw 1 extra card the next time because you've survived from one round to the next. And at any point in the phase, you may discard the last active or inactive card from your sequence and repeat this any number of times. You can kind of clean up the tail end of your sequence as you see fit. At any point in this phase, you may also decide to flee, and there's some actual mechanics behind that as well, if you think that the encounter you've been pulled into is too much. And I will let you guys know that there are encounters that are worth running away from. This game is not the type of game where you're going to want to encounter every single type of monster or thing that you come across. There will be times where it's wiser to just flee. So now during the enemy turn choosing the attack, we just referenced the combat table, and you can see here, we know we have a value of 2 for an attack, plus we're hitting it for 1 from our sledgehammer here, and that's going to give us 3, which lands between 2 and 3, so they're going to actually inflict 2 wounds on us, and then counter all value 0 cards. I have no value 0 cards, so in other words, I don't lose any cards. If it counters any cards, if I had gotten 0 to 1 on my damage, it would have countered every card in my sequence, and literally what would happen is this card would actually be removed from the sequence. Yeah, it can actually destroy your sequence order. So you could essentially, I could have had in some cases like this, if say the values were ignored here, say there were actually 1 and 2, or actually say that was 1 and 0, so it landed in the first one, it could have countered both of these cards out of here. If the total value had landed between 2 and 3, it would have countered all value 0 cards, so these would have stayed in play. But we know that wouldn't happen anyway because these are actually 6 with my hammer included. And then if we actually landed 4 to 5, it says it would counter the last one, so we'd actually lose the last card. And so that's what's kind of happening. You're building your sequence out until you get to the total value of 8. And if you can do that successfully, you then defeat that particular encounter. So it's an ongoing battle with multiple turns potentially if you don't get what you want out of the gate, which is typically the case. You kind of have to work your way there, but you're trying to build a sequence as well as trying to strategically think about how to avoid the nastiness of the AI built within the encounter. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about actually connecting and building out the sequence that I want to do for this particular combat. So as you can see here right now, I already have a 1 card in my sequence that's connected on 3 different points, but I'm only truly connecting it through these 2 or one of these. You only need to have one of them. So as of right now, I do as an attribute have courage. I have 1 courage, so I can use this key. It matches 1 and 1. I could also match on practicality, no problem. But you'll also notice there's another symbol down below that's magic. And when it's magic, you have to ensure that you actually have the magic resource, which is right there in between experience and reputation. So you take a cube that you actually have or a token from there, and you'd be placing it on top of that area. So if I actually had a magic cube to use and I wanted to link it using magic, I'd have to have it like this. So it's very interesting, and magic is something that you can obtain throughout gameplay as you go along, but I currently can't do it because I do not have any resource of magic on me. but I can go ahead and connect through these routes. And again, I only need one of them to be connecting. So we've now put one card into sequence. And the main reason I use this card of the 3 is because it says can only be played as a first card during your turn. Now I'm really tempted to go ahead and to grab Bloodthirsty Rage and just connect it. But you actually cannot do this because these keys don't match. Even though they're the same symbol, one is on one side and there's 2 on the other. Can't do it. I do still have 2 as an attribute, so technically I can use this card at some point, but as of right now I can't connect that. The other thing I have here going for me is this Gather Thoughts card, but again you'll notice the only way to connect it is by using magic, which I don't have, making both of these cards not so useful right now. However, the plus of all this is, by looking at the AI combat card over here, or combat table, you'll notice that I've got into the range of 2 to 3. So what happens is when you're done with your sequence building, you then move into choosing your attack for the enemy. And the enemy's going to react based on what you did to him in damage. So as of right now, my value is 2, but I also was using my Old Steel Smasher along with it, which adds an extra 1. So technically I'm hitting him for 3, but that still lands between 2 and 3. So I actually end up taking 2 wounds according to the particular enemy. That's what he does back to me. And then he's going to counter every value 0 card. Well, the good news is I have no value 0, only value 2. So meaning when I go into the next round, I've already got a card in here that's going to get to stay as I build and up and up and up to try to get to 8. Now, the one thing that I have to do right now is I'm going to have to go ahead and find Bjorn's card here, and I'm going to have to reduce his health down 2. So I'm going from 8 down to 6. And now he's been dealt with, he's taken a couple wounds, and he's ready to stand up and move into a brand new round of combat. But the very first thing, or last thing I should say, you do at the very end of a combat turn is, out of all the cards that you didn't use in your hand, you're allowed to keep 1 and you have to discard the others. I really want to keep Bloodthirsty Rage because that looks super powerful and also has 2 decent connection points and looks much easier to connect versus the Gather Thoughts one where I don't have much magic going on. So I'm going to discard that one. So let's move into the second turn of combat. Now, just to clarify one thing from the previous round, if you choose to pass during the next combat turn, you get an additional card. And what passing essentially means, as I mentioned earlier, is you're literally not going to play any combat cards in the phase. So you're going to just move to the next phase and draw 1 extra card next time. So it is a true full pass. So I didn't true full pass last time. I placed 1 card into the combat sequence, and then I just ended my turn. I discarded cards, I kept 1. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to draw up. So I'm going to draw 3 more cards for myself, but I also get to keep that other card that I put aside. So now I have a total of 4 cards to work with. The other thing too is you take a look at the cards and items that you're using. So I have this horn, but you'll see here that I don't gain the benefit of an extra card at the start of my turn because I didn't end my sequence with a courage. I ended it with an aggression and with a magic, but maybe at some point I'll be able to make use of that. So now we're going to go into the next round here. So I pulled cards that look like this. I've got a defend card here. It says play this card, and playing this card ends your turn. And this is -2 wounds from attacks if last in the sequence. So that's really good. So it's a great defensive card if you put it last. I got Feint, which is an uncounterable card. And it says if the enemy tries to counter this card, mark it, and its value becomes 2 for the rest of the encounter. Oh, interesting. Okay. And then I have this one here that says attack. Playing this card ends your turn. And preparation, draw 1 extra card. And then, of course, I have the Bloodthirsty Rage from the last round. So I'm going to go ahead now and make a strategy here, put together a sequence, and come right back. So one thing to really note here, guys, the fact that anytime during this building a sequence phase, I can go ahead and discard the last active or inactive card from the sequence. And I can do this and repeat it as many number of times as I like, which is really handy for getting rid of this card at the very end if I didn't like the options it's giving me. However, I do have 2 cards in this card draw that I just recently got. One is Defend, which would allow me to connect up here using aggression, and this would actually stop me from taking damage. And you have to make sure you play this at the end of your sequence. There has to be the end of your sequence, plus is will end your turn immediately. It's also a value 0. And then this one here is an attack, which I could use up here, give me an extra value on my attack, but it would also end my turn. So I think at this point in time, I'm probably going to go ahead and I'm going to defend in order to stop an attack from the enemies. So at this point, I'm going to stop right here. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to choose an attack for the enemy based on the value that I have. So I have 3 going into this one because I have 2 from this, 1 from the hammer. So that's going to put it at a 2 damage coming towards me. Now the 2 damage is going to get blocked from this defend, so that's good. But then it's going to counter all 0 cards, and this is a 0 card. So boom, the defend card is removed, and that's going to reset that. Now we're going to come over to my hand, and I've got 3 cards that I have to choose from. These are the 3. I've got that awesome Bloodthirsty Rage, which gives some crazy damage, but it's very dangerous because it could also hurt me later. I have this one here, Faint, and it's uncounterable. It also opens up a lot of different options here as well. And if it tries to get countered, it actually turns into a 2. So this is a sneaky way of getting a good one in there. And then this one here is play this card ending your turn, and you gain an extra card at the start of the next turn. So that could be really useful. Plus it opens up that double, which is huge for that Bloodthirsty Rage. So it's a really tough decision to make here, especially when typically this guy here, if I'm doing 4 or 5, is going to get rid of the last card I have every time anyway, if I get up to that type of damage. So it's a little bit scary, and I'm going to have to get a really good sequence at some point to pull this off, but I have some choices to make and some sequences to build. So I've gone ahead and decided to keep this one, and I'm going to discard my Bloodthirsty Rage and my other attack card, which are these 2. I'm going to turf them, and we're going to go ahead and draw another 3 and see if I can do something more productive on this round. The cards I gained are Final Blow. That looks like a good one. Drop after the enemy attack, if not last in the sequence. Risky Attack. It's 1. It says toss a dial and put it on this card. If it's the skull side, receive +2 damage from the next attack. That's not good. If it's the grail side, then this card is a value of 2. Wow. And then we have a defend card. So I got a couple options here going into this next combat turn. So we're going to get a bit crazy here on this particular turn. I'm going to do some really risky stuff, but I don't like this surprise attack being at the front. So I'm actually going to discard this right now. And we're going to start it off with a risky attack because, hey, why not take a risk? And I do have the attribute to activate this. So immediately I'm going to toss a dial and put it on the card. So I've got a dial right here. This is the grail side. This is the skull side. If it lands on the skull side, I get 2 wounds from the next attack from the enemy. If it's the grail side, the card goes up 2 in value to a 3. I got the grail. Ha! This thing is a 3 now. That's huge. On top of that, I'm next going to play this one right here. Now let me check to make sure I have practicality. Yes, of course I have practicality. So that's amazing. This is just an uncounterable card that will eventually increase to 2 if it's ever countered. But as of right now, I'm happy to leave it there, I think. Unless, let me think about this. So as of right now, this is a 3. That's gonna, and I have 1 from my hammer, so it's a 4. So we'd be actually getting hit for 1 damage, and then they would try to counter the last card. And this is the last card. So if it's only hitting me for 1, maybe I just take that damage and allow this thing to go up in damage total. That actually wouldn't be a bad idea. And then what I could do is I could keep the Final Blow card for the next round maybe and not play my defend right now. I think that makes the most sense. I think I'm going to do that. So I'm going to stop right here, which means I'm not, or I guess what we'll do now is we'll total up things. So I have a total of 3 from risky attack, and I have 1 on my hammer, so it's 4. That means this thing is going to be hitting me back for 1. So I'm going to reduce my health down from 6 to 5. So I'm doing that just off camera, guys. And then what we're going to do is they are going to go ahead and they're going to counter the last, which is this one, and it's uncounterable, cannot do it. If the enemy tries to counter it, mark it, and its value becomes 2. So I'm going to go ahead and take this token here and just drop it, and this is going to now denote that it's 2. Maybe what I'll do just to make it easier is I'll put 2 there. So now we've got a total of 5, and then 1 for the Battle Horn. We have 6 damage going into the next round. That's fantastic. Now, which of the 2 of these do I want to keep? The defend or the Final Blow? I think the Final Blow is what we need, so I'm going to hold on to the Final Blow. And we're going to chuck the defend, and we're going to go into the last round. And I should be able to do this. So 1, 2, 3. We'll reveal these cards here. see what we get. So we got Intimidate. So what I'm going to do is I'll just lay these on top so you guys can see. So we got this one here. This one is one. That's actually not bad. We have Gather Strength. And we have Ingenious Trap. This one says drop if the enemy deals 2 or more in the next attack. If the enemy counters this card, cancel the attack and immediately start your next turn. Wow, that's powerful too. So anyway, we're not going to probably be using any of those because I think right now I know exactly what I plan to do. Time to drop that last card in the sequence. Boom, there we go. I'm happy with just that one card being in play. I'm going to stop right here. We're going to total it up. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1 for my hammer, making it a total of 8, which matches the amount right at the top. So the combat ends right now, guys, and we gain 2 experience and 2 loot with our first encounter down. That was awesome. Now, one additional thing to note, guys, is the fact that I ended my last turn on this card right here, which actually had an open courage spot. So technically, I could have actually taken advantage of the battle horn and drawn an additional card on that last turn, but we all knew we didn't need it anyway. We had the final blow card we had kept from the round before, so I just didn't do it. But I want to let you guys know that I was aware of it, and if I hadn't needed it for a longer battle, I absolutely would have taken advantage of that. So now you've seen your very first battle here with Tainted Grail. So we're going to go ahead and reap the rewards of taking out the band of highwaymen that tried to rob us and steal our property. We ended up taking away some of theirs. So we actually gained 2 wealth on this. So our wealth is going to go up to 3. And we gained 2 experience, which is awesome. So we're really racking things in now, giving us even more options. Our health really isn't all that bad either. We only ended up losing 3 points of health, which isn't too bad. And it's still just above our actual full meter for our energy. So when our energy goes back up, it can go all the way back up. So we got super lucky on that first combat. And how about we actually do a explore action, check out the charred conclave and see what we end up finding there. So we're going to go ahead and flip this card over for an explore action. I am going to reduce my energy down by 1 off screen, so that will give us a total of 1 more energy to spend after this before we move into exhaustion. So we can do one more thing. So we got this location right here, which looks like we've found something extremely interesting. It doesn't take long to find it. You just have to follow your nose. The remnants of an enormous wicker man kneel at the bottom of a small vale. You were here when it was set alight years ago. The day was wet. The wicker man smoldered but didn't burn. Its victim, dozens of tightly packed druids, are still inside, their melted faces and charred beards pressed against the bars and looking towards the gray, silent skies. Barely audible, ceaseless whispers seem to fill the air. So this is extremely cool. So you'll notice at the very bottom of this card, it says if you're playing as Maggot, you're going to actually read a different verse entry than anybody else. Otherwise, you're going to go to the journal and read as normal. So this is what's really cool about the Tainted Grail. Depending on your character, not only his choices or her choices, but actually the character that you're actually choosing to play can actually have an impact on a particular story. So you can actually replay this story with a different character and get a different perspective, different information, and that type of thing, which can really add to the replayability. So that's something I really do like. So let's go ahead and take a look at the journal here and see what's going on inside the charred conclave. So the options for our hero are to stay and listen, which we would go to verse number 1. We can dig through the remains, verse number 2, or we can leave while your sanity remains intact. Ooh, that's tough. Now, my character is kind of more of an aggressive character, so I feel like digging through the remains might actually be the better choice here, but I could be wrong. But we're going to go for it. We're going to try to dig through the remains. It's a little bit messed up. We'll see if we can find something useful. We're going to go ahead with digging through the remains. You hum a joyful song to drown out the whispers and get to work. Prying apart half-metalled bodies is grim and foul work, but you do find some valuables that were locked away with unfortunate druids. If you don't have the robbed wicker man status, gain 1 random item and the Robbed Wickerman status. So we're going to gain a random item plus that status. Then we're going to gain 1 terror. So our actions have consequences. We are gaining our first point of terror because of what we just had to do, or what actually we chose to do. We didn't actually have to do that, but I am a little bit crooked in this current playthrough. And then it says here, if you have, actually it says, then gain 1 terror if you have more than 1 empathy. So that's interesting. So it's not just based on the fact that we went through here. It's only if we have a strong empathy as an attribute that we actually take that extra point of terror. So the interesting thing is my character, as I told you before, is very, very rough and around the edges. And he actually didn't start with any empathy in his attributes whatsoever. So I don't have more than 1, and I haven't upgraded that skill yet. So we actually don't take that point of fear because it doesn't bother him. He doesn't have that empathy to really care, I guess. So that's actually really, really cool. So at the end of the day, we end up gaining the random item and the Robbed Wickerman status. So let's get those 2 things done right now. After rummaging around, it looks like we found some mead. It says to discard at the end of a day to use it, and during this rest that you choose to discard it, ignore the effects of exhaustion, terror, and the Howling Gale event. That sounds really good. It sounds like something that can mitigate some of those bad things. The only consolation for a weary traveler is some mead. So that sounds like a very useful item, so we'll add that to our inventory. We're also going to gain the status of Robbed Wickerman. So I'm going to go ahead and check that off. Looks like we got ourselves quite a few statuses earlier on in the game. And just like that, our exploration is now over. So we'll flip this card back to its regular side and hook it back into the land again. So now we're going to head down from the charred conclave for 1 energy to the Island Asylum. So the Island Asylum here says, the place where humans first set foot on this island is now the last departure point for their sick. And you'll see that there's actually a free location action on this particular island. It says healing rights. We can pay 1 energy and 1 wealth to gain back 2 health. And it's a free thing to do as long as we have those resources. So we're definitely going to do that. Now this will remove the last 2 energy that we have and keep us still out of being exhausted. So it's a perfect way to end our day. All right, so we've gone ahead and we paid the energy cost here. We've also paid 1 wealth. I've dropped from 3 down to 2, and I've now raised my health marker from 5, where it was at after our last combat, up 2 spots. And now we're 1 away from being full, but we know as long as we rest when we're not exhausted, which we aren't because we're not in red, then we're going to be able to gain that last health back, bringing us back to full health. So it works out perfect. So I technically do have no more points of energy to spend unless I want to be exhausted, and I don't. I'd love to explore the Island Asylum and see what's there by flipping the card over, but I'm going to wait, and we're going to decide at this point to rest. So at the end of the day, we're going to go ahead and consume 1 food. We're also going to go ahead and bump our health up to the full place all the way at the top, and our terror will go down by 1, but we haven't gone up by 1 yet, so we don't have to worry about that. We're also not exhausted, so we get to bump our actual energy level all the way back up to full, which is awesome. Now we're going to go ahead and do something really fun, and that's going to be spend our XP, our hard-earned experience points we got. We have 3 of them to spend, and as long as we weren't exhausted during the rest phase, then we're going to be able to go ahead and either bump up our attributes, which are on the sides here of our player board, or get some advanced combat or diplomacy cards. I've chosen to go the advanced combat card route, and the one I've chosen, actually I chose 2 in the end. The first one I chose for 1 experience point is this guy right here, Risky Attack. We used this in the last one. It was very, very risky because it's a coin flip. Basically, it can either give you some wounds or it can actually bump up the value of your card, but for 1 XP we can actually get 3 value, and then if I get a lucky flip, I actually can boost that to 5, which is a crazy amount of damage. Now over here on the other side, this is what was in my deck prior. How this works is if you're going to go ahead and spend 1 of your XP to buy this particular card, you've then spent your XP as I just did, you have to remove a card from your 25 card deck in order to swap it out. it does not have to be the same card that you're upgrading. So I could have chosen something else and kept both risky attacks, but for me, just having one is probably good enough. So I'm just going to go ahead for now and take this one out of my deck and put this one in. The cool thing is, again, as I mentioned early in the video, at later times when you rest, if you ever want to change your mind on a card that you've taken out that's a basic card like this one, you can always swap this one back in at a future rest point. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add that risky attack into the 25 card deck. The next card that I want to purchase for my combat deck is called Bull Rush. And this one here costs 2. And you can see here that we need to have either 2 aggression or we need to have 2 courage. And I definitely have 2 aggression, so I'd be able to use this card. It would give me a value of 2 on the attack. And the best part about this card is the fact that it allows me to skip the next enemy attack. And that is huge because that can just full on stop the enemy from hitting me. So in order to get that into my deck, I've chosen to remove this card. And this is an example of where I'm taking a card out that doesn't match the one I'm adding in at all. And this will cost me 2 XP, so I'll remove the 2 XP from my player board. I'm removing this particular card for a number of reasons. One, I don't have any magic use whatsoever. I have no magic up here to actually use to link this up in any way, shape, or form. So I'm already at a disadvantage by having this card in my deck. Plus, I don't have 2 in my practicality yet. I could eventually get my attribute up, and when I do, this card could make a return, but right now it ends up actually being a dead card that comes up in my deck essentially, and I'd rather move it out for something that has a chance of actually seeing some action. So this card's going to be taken out of my deck, whereas this one's going to be added in, keeping the total to 25. The Island Asylum has an eye icon, so we are going to be able to actually read a dream from this particular card. So we're going to go to the journal and look up entry 109 for the dream. And that's going to do it, guys. We have reached the conclusion of part number 1, so we've obviously got lots to still do here in this particular Kickstarter prototype preview. Really excited for it. Really hope you come back to watch the next episode. The first thing that I want to mention, though, guys, is that this one was a little bit slower and methodical in terms of incorporating the gameplay in the first 2 days with the game rules, getting the flow of the game down. Hopefully you guys have seen enough of the game at this point to understand the basics of it, but there is a lot more to it as we go through, and the game is going to become more and more and more involved narratively as we go along. So I really hope you'll join me in that. I think it's really exciting to explore this area and find out what we need to find and see the story kind of unravel before us. It's super exciting for me. I really hope it's enjoyable for you guys. Hope to see you in the next episode. Also, don't forget, guys, to get in on that giveaway for the Tainted Grail Kickstarter core box and Lord of Hellas core box. That is an awesome giveaway that I really hope is going to make one individual, one subscriber from Rolling Solo extremely happy. Again, as I mentioned, the winner of that competition is going to get Lord of Hellas immediately and Tainted Grail based on Kickstarter production. Cannot wait to see you guys in the next episode. And as always, keep on rolling solo.